Hi everyone, today we're going to be talking about neural and hormonal mechanisms of aggression. So, firstly, we need to think about the limbic system and how this is involved in aggression and violence. So we need to know here that the limbic system, along with particular areas of the limbic system, can affect how we deal with aggressive situations. And the role of the limbic system is to satisfy our emotional urges, that almost like evolutionarily need to let off steam and show aggressive behaviour. Now, there are several different areas of the limbic system, all are listed on this picture, but you don't need to know all of them for your exam. So, the hypothalamus, hippocampus, amygdala and thalamus are probably the four most important parts. But as I said, you don't need to know all of them in detail, but you probably know some of them. So we know that the hypothalamus is involved in the fight or flight response, and this is obviously to do with aggressive behaviour, because if we fight, we are showing aggressive behaviour. And also, if we are in the fight or flight response, then something dangerous is happening to us where we might need to show aggressive behaviour. So this makes sense that it's linked with regulating our emotions in some way. We also know the hippocampus is involved in memory, so we're thinking back to like Clive Waring and HM who lost their memory and had damage to the hippocampus. And we know therefore that this is going to store memory of aggressive events. Finally, we know that the amygdala is involved in regulating our emotions, so this is going to again have an impact on how well we're able to regulate our emotions, maybe means how aggressive we are likely to be. And we haven't learned about the thalamus yet, so don't worry too much about that at the moment. So you don't need to know for your exam the exact locations of each of these, but you do need to know that they're roughly in this area. So you might want to just annotate on your diagram where they are, i.e. that they're all in the centre of the brain. So the first two we've already discussed. The amygdala is the emotional response to an aggressive behaviour. In particular, it regulates and decides how important something is in terms of its emotion, so its emotional importance. So it's the idea that we pick an appropriate response based on how important we value it to be. Obviously, if we see something that is immediately aggressive and therefore puts us in danger, we're more likely to react to it than something minor like someone making us jump. We also know as an extension that the hippocampus is involved in long-term memories in particular, so therefore we're going to use our past experiences of similar situations to judge and make a judgment based on that of whether we should show aggressive behaviour in the future. So if we've been in a similar situation before that led to aggressive behaviour, we might need to prepare ourselves for the same thing to happen. Think you haven't handed in your homework and you know that last time you didn't hand in your homework, your teacher got really annoyed at you, and you showed aggressive behaviour back to them, like you were shouting at them as well, then you're likely to show the same response again. Hopefully not though. An example of this is, or evidence to support this, is by a patient called SM, and this research found that this woman was just not at all scared of anything, and she'd destroyed both sides of her amygdala. And this suggests that our amygdala is processing our emotional response, and in particular our fear response, because no matter what happened to her, she was not scared of it when she should actually be, because it would have protected her from safety, because she just ran into things that she shouldn't have, and therefore caused her harm. Moving on from this, then we've got Gosvick et al. And remember the ultimatum game from the relationships topic, where we're asked if we want to split the money, if we had to split the money with someone and you were given an offer, would you accept that offer or not accept that offer? So you were given like £1,000 and they said there was £1,000 and they could either give you half of it, 500, or they could give you less than half, like 300, or even less than that, like £200, and they had to decide how much they would give you. Now, it makes sense for the person who's giving you the money to give you the least amount so that they get the most amount, although we know most people don't do that. In this version of the study, they gave people an unfair amount. So they gave them like £200, and they found that the amygdala was more likely to be activated in response to this because they were aggressive and annoyed at the fact that they had got less than the other person and they didn't think this was fair. Now, this shows that there are several areas of the brain that are involved in aggressive behaviour, but all of them are associated with the limbic system. But alongside this task, they also gave the participants benzodiazepine drugs, which reduce the arousal of the limbic system, so there is less emotional regulation. And they found that people are more likely, it halved the number of rejections, people are more likely to accept it and just move on with it, showing that the limbic system is involved in aggressive behaviour. So we've done kind of the brain structure, and now we want to think about serotonin. So we know serotonin is a neurotransmitter, which is a chemical message. And we know that serotonin is almost like a mood booster. It makes us feel like slightly happier in some ways. And it works in the way that it's released, the neurotransmitter is released from the neuron and is passed on to the next one, so the message is passed along. But we need to know whether it's an excitatory or inhibitory neuron as well. So we know that serotonin is an excitatory neuron, and therefore, serotonin is an inhibitory neuron, and therefore it doesn't have that much energy to pass the information along because it's inhibited. So basically there's less energy, so there's less likely that the message is passed along. So in normal people, inverted commas, we have normal levels of serotonin, and this means that the amygdala doesn't fire too much, which means we don't get overly impulsive behaviour. But with people with aggression, we've got less serotonin being fired, which means there's more likely that the amygdala is activated, like it's not under control, and therefore we're more likely to show impulsive behaviours. So we know that serotonin is a neurotransmitter which is involved in passing messages along the brain, and its role is to inhibit neural activity. And normal levels of serotonin, particularly in the orbital frontal cortex, are linked with reduced firing of neurons and a decreased level of self-control. But lower levels of serotonin have an influence on the cortex and lead to reduced levels of self-control and increased levels of impulsive behaviour. So basically, people who are more aggressive are more likely to have low levels of serotonin and therefore low levels of self-control, and therefore are more likely to be aggressive. Finally, we've got testosterone. We know that testosterone is a hormone now, so we're talking about hormonal mechanism, and we know that it's particularly present in males and also has many different effects on our body. But one of the effects that it has on our body is to increase aggressive behaviour, because it makes us more likely to protect and to fight. So the male sex hormone has a variety of features, such as increasing our facial hair and causing broad shoulders, but it's also shown in regulating our social behaviour, so how often we are likely to show levels of aggressive behaviour. And they found that there's evidence that there's a positive correlation between testosterone levels of criminals and their aggressive behaviour. Remember, when we're thinking about correlations here, we want to analyse the fact that there might not be a cause and effect, i.e. did the aggressive behaviour cause the higher levels of testosterone, or did testosterone cause the high levels of aggressive behaviour? So I want you to think about what's the difference between a neural and a hormonal mechanism now that we've discussed both, and how you get full marks on this question. So hopefully you've thought about the fact that neural mechanisms are mechanisms which have an influence on your brain, whereas hormonal mechanisms have an impact on your glands in the brain or the body. In order to get full marks for this question, you must have a connective in your answer in order to get all the marks. So, thinking of evaluation of neural and hormonal mechanisms, you might want to evaluate some of them together and some of them separately. Either is fine, and you can use a bit of both. So I'll just go through the ones that we've discussed. we've got the role of other structures. So we know that the orbital frontal cortex plays a role, and we also know that the limbic system plays a role, but we've got both playing a role, and this makes it more complicated because we're suggesting that several areas of our brain play a role in this, whereas actually each theory on its own is reductionist because it's not assuming that that is the case. We also know that drugs which increase the levels of serotonin have decreased levels of aggression. For example, antidepressants also make people less aggressive. So this is a problem. This is basically the opposite of what we've just talked about. So it's suggesting that actually there's research to contradict the idea. Other theories are the dual hormone hypothesis, which suggests testosterone is only one impact, but we've also got to think about how cortisol might have a role. So again, not taking such a reductionist approach here, and therefore identifying that there are other factors that might affect aggression. We can also think more widely about this. We know that aggressive behaviour isn't just going to be caused by hormonal or any other biological mechanisms, but it's also going to be caused by the situation that the person's in. People don't tend to be aggressive without a situation that triggers them to be aggressive. We've got mainly correlational research, for example, in testosterone, and therefore this is a problem because we're not showing that there's a cause and effect. We're just showing that they might be linked, whereas there might actually be a third extraneous variable that we don't know about. Again, we've talked about reductionism in biological structures, so taking a more holistic approach would encompass environmental factors that might have an impact, as discussed before. And we've got the SM case study about the woman who was fearing nothing, but this isn't enough evidence to suggest that this brain structure is solely responsible for this behaviour. Thanks for listening, guys.